guys, you caught me in the middle of some spring cleaning. Now, I know what you might be wondering, isn't it winter? But I like to do my spring cleaning 6 months late to keep the dirt on my house on its toes. I do everything 6 months late, it's why the IRS fucking hates me. Last thing to clean is my wallet, and it's my Costco membership card. I don't need this anymore, I'm already a member of a cult. Ever since last year when I talked about some cult classic video games that got accepted into one. But it's been a while since they've given me any cult orders. I guess they forgot about me. Or it's in the stack of mail I haven't looked at in 6 months. It's probably that. Bills, death threats from the IRS. Then hey, here's a letter from the cult.
Meegle, we've received your request to be invited to the cult of Donkey Kongius. However, we regret to inform you that we cannot accept you into the cult at this moment.
I wasn't a member this whole time? Oh yeah, that's right, I got arrested last year for slaughtering a lamb. But why wouldn't they want me? If they already something of lamb murder, then who is? It can't be because of any flaws in my character.
We can't accept you at this time because you didn't talk about any cult classic horror games. If you want us to reevaluate our decision, you must take a look at 3 cult classic horror games.
They're right. It is a cult after all. How can I prove I'm truly dedicated if I don't take a look at something scary? Well, that's about to change.
Also, do not under any circumstances kill any lambs.
I have no idea what they're asking at me. What does it take to make a game scary? Not much. The reasons why we play video games can vary, but the main factor is usually to have fun. Whether you play platformers, first-person shooters, racing games, it's usually safe to assume that your end goal is to have a good time. But what if you wanted to play a game for other reasons? What if you wanted to play a game and not have fun? It's easier than you think. Horror games are a genre where fun is kind of on the background, while atmosphere and terror take the front seat. It's not that you can't have fun while playing them, it's just that fun isn't their main focus. And while I personally have a lot of fun with some horror games, it's not usually a genre I flock to often. I enjoy Resident Evil games, Silent Hill games are usually the most effective at actually scaring me, and I'm still not allowed to play Luigi's Mansion. But a whole genre that doesn't use fun as a selling point is, understandably, a hard sell for the average person. Because of that, aside from the heavy hitter franchises, horror games as a whole are much more of a niche compared to others, and because of that, horror games make up a large portion of gaming cult classics. Last Halloween I took a look at 3 of gaming's most well-known cult classics, but this time around I'm going to take a look at 3 in the ever-popular shit-my-pants genre of video games. There's a whole heap of horror cult classics out there, but I think in order to truly bring in that spooky spirit, I'm going to need to go to the very beginning of horror, the NES. Scariest shit I've seen all day. The pre-3D era of gaming wasn't exactly known for its horror games. Sure, you had horror-themed games like Castlevania and Ghosts and Goblins, but if we go even further back, even games like that weren't super common. Like, ooh, Haunted House in the Atari 2600? Scariest thing about that is that you're playing Atari. But that's just in the West. In Japan, arguably the birthplace of horror video games, they were doing something that us in North Carolina would never dare to attempt. The Famicom, short for Family Computer, was a Japanese version of the NES, and it had a lot of games on it that never left Japan. Some of these have garnered a lot of notoriety and become cult classics in their own right, but only one of them can be cited as one of the earliest examples of a survival horror game, and I'll give you a hint. It ain't Joy Mech Fight. Sweet Home is a survival horror game developed by Capcom for the Famicom. Released in 1989, many people consider this to be the very first survival horror game ever. Survival horror is probably the most popular type of horror game, and it can be categorized by having survival elements like resource management and combat. Sweet Home was the first game to really have all the elements of survival horror. But does that make it a worthy cult classic today? Let's find out. You boot the game up, get a pretty standard title screen for the time, but with a twist. The text is all red, and we all know that red is scary. So what's the story here? Sweet Home follows a group of 5 filmmakers as they travel through a dead painter's abandoned mansion, trying to find and document a series of paintings that are believed to be lost to time. They enter the mansion and get threatened by the ghost of a mysterious woman before being trapped inside. Now they have to work together to avoid the different spirits that haunt the mansion and escape with their lives. It's a pretty standard plot for the time, and it's actually based on a Japanese movie of the same name. I've never seen the movie, but from what I can tell, the plot is pretty much identical to how it is in the game. Either way, I appreciate how quickly they get to the point and let you jump into gameplay. The game mostly consists of you roaming the mansion and finding items to help you pass certain roadblocks. It's kind of like a Metroidvania in that regard. Each character starts off with an item specific to them that you'll need to utilize at certain points to progress, like a vacuum in the first room to clean up broken glass, or a lighter to burn this rope that's blocking the way. Now, that all sounds fine and dandy, but there's one key issue here. You can only have 3 members in your party at any given time, and the other characters just stand in place wherever you leave them. So there's plenty of moments where you have no choice but to backtrack to get a certain character who you probably only need for one specific item. I know what you're thinking.
They done DK64 my horror game!
And yeah, unfortunately the level of backtracking is kind of annoying. There's nothing more disheartening than taking your group really far into the mansion, only for you to have to come all the way back to the beginning just because you don't have the right character. Like, how am I supposed to know who's going to be needed for what with no hints or anything? They really should have let you swap characters in the menu or something, or at the very least had a shared inventory. Anyway, that's the gist of Sweet Home. You roam around the mansion and look for items to progress while avoiding these wisp things from snatching your party members, but you're bound to encounter enemies at some point, and sure enough... So this game has turn-based battles. Was not expecting that, honestly. I mean, I guess it makes sense. Final Fantasy came out a few years before and laid the groundwork for turn-based games, but like... Who looked at that and thought it was a good fit for a horror game? Okay, now it's my turn to piss my pants. I guess I can kinda get it, that feeling of a really intense turn-based battle where you can almost feel your inevitable death are pretty common in RPGs, so translating that to a horror setting does actually make a bit of sense. One other thing that really does add to the tension is permadeath. If a member of your party dies, that's it, they're done for good. That alone adds way more tension to these encounters, and while I normally hate random battles, here it keeps you on the edge of your seat, wondering if every single step you take will lead you to a battle that may cost you one of your teammates. That, plus the honestly pretty decent attempt for having an atmosphere here, makes Sweet Home, well, not scary by any means, oddly eerie in a way. It's definitely got more of a horror vibe than other games at the time, at least that I can think of. The only other one that even comes close is Splatterhouse. And some of the more astute viewers may have noticed some similarities between this and another famous horror game released much later. The slow door transitions, this reveal of the enemy's fleshless face. Yep, Sweet Home was a key inspiration behind the very first Resident Evil game. Heck, Capcom initially envisioned RE1 as a flat-out remake of Sweet Home, wanting to use the updated technology to make the game actually scary. While Sweet Home really lacks in the horror department, I can appreciate the attempt to make a horror game on the same hardware that gave us Nuts and Milk. And the fact that it laid the groundwork for what is easily the most well-known horror franchise of all time? Yeah, how can I not give the game credit? It earns a cult classic label based on that alone. And while I'm not sure I can recommend playing it to completion today, I think anybody interested in the history of horror games should really give Sweet Home a try.
We're off to a good start, I'd say. But let's face it, 8-bit hardware isn't exactly the best for producing a horror game. Not because of the graphics. I've seen some truly fucked up shit with even lesser graphics. More so because, during this time, developers were still trying to get a grasp on what made games good, let alone scary. But, if we move up a couple generations to the PlayStation 1, we get one of the most underrated horror franchises of all time.
Clock Tower, a series that technically started on the Super Famicom, but I'm talking about the PS1 port, so suck it up. Initially released in 1995 and then ported to the PS1 in 97, Clock Tower is considered to be one of the earliest examples of a horror game. But unlike Sweet Home, I think this game actually succeeds at being genuinely pretty scary. Clock Tower was developed by Human Entertainment, who you may know for, nothing. Most of their games never left Japan, and Clock Tower is no exception. They do have a few games that did release in the US, but they're not exactly super well known. Clock Tower gained some recognition here in the West thanks to fan translations of both the Super Famicom and PS1 versions, and I'll be taking a look at the PS1 version today. The game follows Jennifer, an orphan who, along with 3 other girls, gets adopted by a rich guy named Simon Barrows, who has the girls moved into his mansion, locally known as the Clock Tower. When they get to the mansion, Jennifer decides to do some looking around, and she hears a scream from across the house. When she gets back to the living room, everyone is gone. So now she has to explore the Barrow mansion to try to find out what happened to everyone. Clock Tower is a point-and-click adventure type deal, and while you may not think that would really mesh well with a survival horror setting, I couldn't disagree more. I'm already a fan of point-and-click adventure games, and a big part of them is this feeling of wandering around aimlessly. That feeling of being lost actually translates super well into a horror environment in my opinion. You always have this little bit of delay between noticing something in whatever room you're in, and when you can actually react to it. And much like tank controls in games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, I think that added bit of input delay adds to the tension during some of Clock Tower's spookier moments. But okay, you wander around the mansion looking for people moving at a snail's pace. That is, unless you double click to run faster, you're welcome. Eventually you reach this bathroom, open the shower curtain, and find the dead body of one of Jennifer's friends. And it's here we get introduced to the game's main antagonist, Angus Young from AC/DC. This little goblin man is the Scissorman, and don't let his small size and goofy looking schoolboy outfit fool you. After he's introduced, the game becomes 10 times scarier. This first encounter with him is the only scripted one in the entire game. After this, Scissorman can appear from literally anywhere. In boxes, from the ceiling, hiding behind the curtains like the damn child that he clearly is. His design may not be that intimidating, like, at all, but the fact that your only option is to run and hide makes dealing with him genuinely pretty nerve-wracking. The game now consists of solving puzzles and getting around the mansion while trying to make sure Scissorman doesn't come and, do that. Something I both love and hate about Clock Tower is the open-ended nature of it. There's a lot of puzzles that don't have an obvious solution to them, or even have multiple solutions, and that sounds awesome, but a lot of times it leads to you needing to search the entire map for one benign and really easy to miss item. Like, if you get caught and locked in this cell, it's normally a game over, unless you picked up some ham from the kitchen to give to this prisoner guy. But like, who in their goddamn mind is going to even notice this ham, let alone pick it up and go, oh, I better save this in case I run into a starving prisoner later? That's 2 games I've talked about now that have confusing sections involving meat. There better not be a third or else I'm shanking the nearest lamb.
Oh, it's a figure of speech!
The game is really short, and a lot of the length and replay value comes from the branching paths in the story and the multiple endings. Even just having multiple endings was very ahead of its time, and something that later horror games like Silent Hill would do as well. This game was revolutionary in so many ways, and while I don't find it absolutely terrifying nowadays, I absolutely had a good time playing it. What it lacks in sheer piss-your-pants horror, I think it makes up for in a feeling of tension and dread that not only was unheard of at the time, but that pretty much laid the groundwork for every survival horror game that came after. Now, a lot of you may be saying, but what about Alone in the Dark? It was a fully 3D survival horror game and it came out 3 years before Clock Tower. No. Look at this. You look at this and tell me you think this is scary. Clock Tower is, in my opinion, the most influential and important survival horror game of all time. And aside from some archaic elements that were par for the course from the late 90s, I think it absolutely holds up today and is 100% worthy of being called a cult classic.
Well, there you have it. 2 of the first and most influential horror games of all time. Both certified cult classics in my opinion. While Sweet Home is definitely held up more so by its legacy rather than the raw gameplay, the same cannot be said for Clock Tower, as I still think it's one of the best examples of a 2D horror game out there. But we did it, everyone. We found some genuine gaming horror cult classics. Time to pack it all up and go home. We should probably talk about what just happened, huh?
The year was 2002.
Oh, God.
The GameCube was in its 2nd year of life, which is also coincidentally its 1st year of death. The GameCube notoriously didn't sell that well. While it had a great initial launch year, each and every following year Nintendo had a harder and harder time selling it. Which really sucks because the GameCube has, in my opinion, one of the best libraries of any Nintendo system ever. You can absolutely tell Nintendo was trying their absolute hardest to make and publish the most high quality games imaginable. And that mentality is what led to them being forced to swallow their pride and do the unthinkable. Publish an M-rated game. This was a hard pill for Nintendo to swallow. Publishing M-rated games is the one thing that Nintendo previously would rather die than do. These are the same guys that published Kirby Superstar. Do you really think they dare put their names on something with the same rating as GTA San Andreas? But that's what you gotta do to make ends meet, so Nintendo partnered with Silicon Knights to publish Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem in 2002. This game was actually being developed for the N64 for years before it was moved over to the GameCube. Surely that decision helped the GameCube sell better, right?
Nope.
At least the game itself sold well, right? Eternal Darkness was, by all possible measures, a commercial flop, selling less than 500,000 copies worldwide. I think a big part of that was definitely the audience the GameCube had. Like, this is where I played Donkey Konga, man, don't show me this. Being a system mostly marketed at kids, I don't think it was the best home for an M-rated game, let alone a horror game. But much like most cult classics out there, the low sales do not reflect on this game's quality. This is widely considered to be not just one of the best survival horror games of all time, but just flat out one of the best games of all time. Guess who agrees? But don't take my word for it. Let's dive into the world of Eternal Darkness. The game opens up with the main character, Alexandra Roivas, inheriting a mansion from her recently deceased grandfather, Edward Roivas. Maybe the first instance of a Luigi's Mansion like. Anyway, Alex's grandfather was murdered, so she travels to the mansion to try and solve his murder herself. While exploring the mansion, she stumbles upon a book made of human skin.
Oh, my favorite!
Called the Tome of Eternal Darkness. This is revealed later in the story, but it turns out her family belongs to a long line of protectors of the tome, and that the tome is meant to be used to ensure that an ancient evil god-like being remains sealed away. The tome contains written accounts of each previous protector's time spent watching after it, and a majority of the game is spent in flashbacks as you control one of many former protectors. The gameplay itself is split into two sections, those where you play as Alex exploring the mansion and solving puzzles using clues you got from the tome, and those where you play as one of the former protectors in the aforementioned flashback scenes. The gameplay itself is split into two sections. There's a lot of different characters you play as, each with their own strengths, weaknesses, and sections to play through. There's a Roman general named Pius, a Persian swordsman named Kareem, a Canadian firefighter named Michael Edwards, and even Alex's grandfather himself. The gameplay of Eternal Darkness is pretty standard for survival horror games up to that point. If you've played Resident Evil or any of the PS2 Silent Hill games, you pretty much know what to expect. Resource management, puzzle solving, weird camera angles, the whole shebang. But there is a whole lot that makes Eternal Darkness stand out. First off, there's no tank controls, which I can tell some of you out there are screaming. The combat system is also pretty unique. You pretty much exclusively use melee weapons for most of the game, and while it seems like your standard hack away at enemies until they die affair, there's actually a targeting system where you can attack specific parts of the enemy's body. Pair that with the different weapon types being blunt or bladed, and it adds this unique level of strategy to the combat. Like, you could use bladed weapons to behead enemies, and while that doesn't guarantee an instant kill, it means the enemies won't be able to see you, meaning you can run right past them. Or you could skillfully chop their arms off, meaning they straight up can't attack you. It makes you think about the best way to approach each situation given your current kit. There's also a pretty cool magic system that uses a rock, paper, scissors mechanic. You see, the Roman guy you play as in the beginning, Pius Augustus, he's actually the main villain, and he's trying to unleash an ancient god upon the world. But what's really cool is, you get to pick which of the three gods Pius pledges allegiance to, each one having their own corresponding color. That affects the magic system, as whichever god you're fighting against, the enemies will usually use magic of that god's color. Then you have to use the opposite color spell type to combat their spells. It adds such a cool dynamic to an otherwise pretty standard system. But okay, those things aren't why Eternal Darkness is so popular. There's one gameplay mechanic that triumphs above the rest: the Sanity system. This green meter up here represents the player's sanity, and it goes down during specific story segments or if a player witnesses a monster for too long. That's why whenever you can, it's best to decapitate enemies so they can't stare at you and lower your sanity. But when your sanity is lowered, the game starts playing tricks on you. From things like torches sparking loudly, putting fake ammo all over the floor, or even something as small as having fake footsteps and door knocking sounds. These sanity effects are what give Eternal Darkness a lot of its notoriety. I know a game like Amnesia also has a sanity system, but that game literally just makes the screen all wobbly, and here it has an actual tangible effect on gameplay. There's even things that break the fourth wall, and these were so cool for 2002. Like, it'll put you in a room full of enemies and say your controller is disconnected, or it'll say someone muted the TV. There's even a blue screen of death here. None of this is going to be really all that convincing today, but you gotta remember that this was all the way back in 2002, and for the time, these sanity effects were pretty mind-blowing. The only real gripe I have is, I will say, it's really not all that scary. The gameplay is amazing, the resource management and combat were both really good. And while the game has a really intense and spooky atmosphere, I can't say I'd have me on the edge of my seat or anything. However, none of that is enough to diminish how innovative and high quality Eternal Darkness is. It's a shame that it sold so poorly. I think this is easily one of the best games on the GameCube, and one that holds up way better gameplay-wise than something like the original Silent Hill 2. Yeah, I said it. Overall, these two games are absolutely worthy of being called cult classics. Sweet Home may not be scary, like, at all, but what it lacks in horror, it makes up for in a unique take on a survival horror RPG, a genre that's dominated by indies like Omori today. Clock Tower may just be one of my favorite survival horror games of all time, and Eternal Darkness is a masterclass in game design, even if it lacks a little bit in the spooky department.
Well, those are some of gaming's biggest cult classics. I'm actually glad I decided to take a look at some horror games. It really solidified the fact that most cult classics end up that way, mostly just because of a lack of mainstream appeal. However, it's because the fact that they didn't reach the mainstream that makes them so much more special nowadays. This entire thing has me excited to talk about more horror games in the future. But for now, I think I've finally done enough to get accepted into the cult.
Dear Meegle, you did it! You talked about 3 gaming horror cult classics. Unfortunately, we can't accept you into our cult.
Come on, why not?
Because between reading the last sentence and this one, you killed another lamb.
How does this keep happening?